someday, not today, not ever next week, not ever next year, but someday there will be some explanation of why we have the phenomenon of making a choice, but it never delivers the goods. And on the other hand, no charity is given to the possibility that there is a mind that is not material, that is in fact in a sense freely acting and does make a real choice. And so that's sort of the outline of my position. I'm sure that Bruhmachine has a good retort here, and we can go into the specific points if you want. It's prophylactics, Onan. It's prophylactic.
Okay, sure. So I guess I'll start the debate by talking about kind of the evidence that Cooldog brought up in favor of pragmatism. So first of all, I think that from what I understand, the argument there is that the belief that best coheres to our personal experiences is the knowledge that is going to be true. And I think this is a pretty bad standard for evidence, especially when it comes to debate like this, because it ignores that all illusions can happen, right? From this argument, I would be expected to believe that in a stressful situation, time literally slows down, right? It's not just my perception that slows down. The actual existence of the world slows down for me. Similarly, like I would believe that when I just get out of bed, the world is literally foggier. It's also not my perception. I think that rather the best explanation is judged by the belief that is best supported by our current evidence, is the idea that we have illusory experiences, right? Time doesn't actually slow down when we're stressed, just as you don't actually have the ability to make choices. That's an illusory experience because of the chemistry of our brain, basically. So the argument that I'm going to put forward is basically the causal determinism in physics argument. So if we look at the physical accounts of our world, we have a fairly good understanding of things like the Standard Model. And the Standard Model has a lot of particle interactions, but none of those particle interactions adheres the random choice, right? Adheres where people get to influence their free will. And because I think that that's the issue, I think it's going to be rather difficult to posit a way in which you could have this type of non-physical entity that's making a choice and then have the physical interaction causing your body to do certain things, right? We have a good idea of what the causal factors of almost every particle interaction are, and none of them is going to be involved in free will. Specifically, I think that this brings up a rather major problem for Cooldog, is that you're going to have to give a mechanism for how you have free will. And frankly, I just don't see that there could be any such mechanism. And that's the problem, is that anytime somebody makes a choice, they're going to justify that choice with certain prior beliefs, right? I'm sure that free will isn't actually just random chance. So anytime I justify the choice, I say, well, I decided to, go to this ice cream store because I had a good experience. I'm actually showing that determinism is true, because we assume that given that there's more evidence weighted towards one side of a choice than the other, that people choose that side of the choice, and therefore it is really the evidence causing that choice. I hope I'm being clear here. In short, I think that every choice can be reduced to one of two factors: it's genetics and upbringing. And in the case where there's some other entity that's actually making the choice of free will and not governed by physical laws, I don't think that there's any way to believe that interacts with the physical body. In short, I think that the non-physical physical interaction problem means that we should assume that physicalism is true. And then this last point about how people don't give sufficient charity to the case. People don't give sufficient charity to there being an external mind, but people do give a huge amount of charity in physics to there being an explanation for emergent concepts such as self-awareness. So I don't think that you need to have a specific explanation in physics, just like you don't need to have a specific explanation for mind, right? I'm not demanding that you tell me exactly how it works. I'm asking you for some type of hypothetical mechanism which works. And I think a hypothetical mechanism exists for physics because we know that there are emergent properties. We know that when you have things interacting on large scales, whether that be ant colonies or neurons, that you can have attributes that none of them individually have. So I think it is reasonable to posit that that's a possibility under physics, even if we don't have definite proof. But I just don't think that the inverse is true. I don't think it's reasonable to posit that they're external minds, especially with this interaction problem.
Right.
Okay, sure. I'll leave it off there.
So I think you completely misunderstood the point of pragmatism, and your examples show that, right? and that you're taking specific examples of illusions, right? And under my viewpoint, if you believe in an illusion, that's not going to work out for you, right? If you're in the desert and you see a mirage and you believe that there's really water there, that's not going to work out for you. So my view completely checks for illusions in that sense, because they don't help you get through the day. Right now, you're giving me ultra specific examples, but the issue is that literally everybody is under this illusion. Right? It's not just one person waking up foggy in the morning or one person in a stressful event, but it's literally everybody is under this illusion. And that's an entirely different story, right? It seems that that's like a feature of us being human, is that we have this characteristic of making choices, right? Or at least having the perception, the phenomenal perception of it. And that's entirely different than the case of specific illusions, right? And so I think that, my view can also be amenable to dealing with illusions quite easily, as explained. So now we're going to talk about like the causal determinists in physics. Obviously, you're relying on the standard model. You don't want to talk about quantum physics. Of course you don't, right?
No, I'm happy to talk about quantum physics.
But I think that, you're making a reduction here when there is a spontaneity inherent in these physical systems, right? With the way that quantum physics works, even though it's still an emerging field and we don't have as much evidence, or knowledge about all the inner workings there. So you're asking me also on point 3 to give a mechanism for free will. That's mind, right? And I think that we clearly have a sense in which there is at least a perception that we have a mind. And it seems like we go every day in sort of embodied in a body for sure, but then there's also not just the life of the body, but the life of the mind, right? There's an imagination there, and there's a way of thinking conceptually that is not either perceptually or in any way seemed to be in a physical sense. And of course, I just pose the question back to you, which obviously, as I pointed out, in the first part, is that you of course punt on, right? The scientific physicalist always punts on this question. They say, you don't have a mechanism, but by the way, I don't have one either. Just wait for the physics to happen, right? And so I demand of you to tell me how the brain causes the mind and how the brain gives us the illusion, in your words, of choice. You can't do that. And so since you cannot deliver a sufficient explanation under any interpretation of the principle of sufficient reason, right, you can't give me that. I don't think that we're warranted in believing that determinism is true. Why not go with what's immediately in front of us, right? And that's the appeal of my argument. Go with what's immediately in front of us.
Okay, so sure, a few things. I think I'll just take in reverse order. So on the topic of me punting, so I agree. I'm not giving you a fantastic explanation. I have to give you the roughest outlines, right? I have to say that there are emergent properties. Those exist in the world. It's reasonable. Sorry?
Why?
What do you mean, why? Because...
Why are you warranted in saying that there are emergent properties?
Well, because, we observe emergent properties, right? We observe like ant colonies having emergent properties. Or we observe the economy having emergent properties, right? So perhaps these aren't the same type of emergent properties, but it's clearly the case that emergent properties do exist as a category of item. Is that fair?
You're not explaining to me how you can prove that from a specific physical interaction that there is a necessary existent property of it. I don't get it. You're not giving me why. You're just saying, oh, you can look at it and you see it. And I say, no, well, I think that there's a property there that is not derived necessarily from the physical. You have to prove that necessitation, that causal link from physical interaction to emergent property.
So what I'm trying to show is that emergent properties do exist, like in other categories. Do you disagree with that?
You would have to prove to me exactly how a physical interaction without anything else produces an emergent property in order for me to grant this claim.
So, no, I disagree with you. I don't think that I have to prove to you exactly how this works. I have to show that my alternative is more realistic than yours. And the issue is that we already have things where we see emergent properties, right? Emergent properties exist in the world, even if not in the brain.
I'll grant.
Okay, so in that case, I think it is more reasonable to take what we see as an existing existing physical structures, like for example, some emergent properties, and say that we might believe that that's the case in the brain, than it is to take something totally out of left field, like a mind, and then posit that that might be the cause of decisions, right? I don't think that that's reasonable for precisely the reason that I don't think that we see any other minds in the world. I don't think we even see any other non-physical entities that interact directly with physical entities in the way that you're positing that a mind would.
So on this point, right, it is, again, but you don't have a direct, I mean, we're directly in contact with our consciousness. We have no choice but to be. It's right there, right? It's how we look through the world. I can't think of anything that we're closer to, and now you're somehow positing something that we can't even look at, right? That we can't come into contact with is somehow by some magic that you won't tell us, and you can't, right? You admit that you can't. Right, and by some magic, this causes this grand illusion, right? Which is more reasonable, you know, that you're seeing through your eyes and you're thinking, or that, you know, there's this mystical way in which the physics interact that you can't tell me that produces this, which is more reasonable. And I think that, you know, Occam's razor wins in my case, right?
Okay, I mean, I disagree with you there, because I think that it only wins if you use very loaded terminology, right? I'm not saying that, to be clear, I'm not saying that people don't experience consciousness, right? I mean, any observation that you have aligns perfectly with also my worldview. The only difference here is that I'm saying, whereas you posit a whole new entity, I'm saying that we should try our best to take existing entities and build on them in such a way that we could see how this would work. I think that Occam's razor actually is better expressed as take the path which requires the fewest new assumptions. And
yeah,
your new
you're
assumption
not actually getting there. Like, that's
no,
the difference, is I'm actually getting to the result that we have in front of us, right? We both agree that we're conscious, right? I'm actually getting to the result, and you're like, well, I can't explain it, right? That's the difference here.
Wait, sorry, you also can't explain it. I don't think it's fair to let you get away with saying that, you know, you just posit a mind and then therefore that's like a sufficient explanation.
Right?
Sorry?
They're co-constitutive, right? We have mind and body, right? When you close your eyes, or if you go into a sensory deprivation tank, right, you have mind there, right? You can imagine things in your own mind. You can prove it to yourself. Think of a red ball, right? In your own head, you have thought, right? And that's the evidence of mind.
But the issue is I don't think that evidence is distinguishable from the evidence for from the like that evidence is perfectly explained if you just have the illusion of mind. Those two are like, I don't think that gives any more evidence to your case than to mine. I just think that when we look at the other issues, whereas I'm positing that things we already know exist can exist in a different context in the mind, you're positing that something we've never seen before or have no direct evidence for, which is the mind exists, and that it's able to interact with matter, which we've also never observed before.
But you don't have direct evidence of the emergent properties either.
No, neither of us has direct evidence. That's why mine only requires.
Why are we warranted in believing your claim?
Why are we warranted in believing your claim?
I'm just saying that I don't believe that determinism is true. I don't see the warrant on your side.
Okay. The reason I think that you're warranted, again, is because I think that whereas the direct evidence is not particularly supportive of either side, what we know about the existing matter of the universe is strongly supportive of a physicalist claim, because we know that matter interacts purely on a physical level, and we have no idea of any mind that would influence the matter, right?
Right. And again, like, the problem is, and this is going back to the pragmatism, right, is in order to uphold your view, I have to deny everything about my everyday life. Right? I have to deny everything about that to somehow somehow get this physics thing which you can't explain. I have to deny all of this other shit that I believe in and that makes me wake up in the morning and gets me through my day. I have to deny all of that to somehow be less, I don't know. Like, I don't get it.
Okay. All right. Well, I think if we're going to go back to the pragmatist claim, that's fair. I'd also like to really quickly address quantum randomness. You raised that, but I really don't think that it supports your case at all. I mean, quantum randomness is quite well described. There's no, as far as we could tell, influence of conscious agents on it. So even if there is some randomness, which I could grant you, that doesn't mean that like it creates consciousness. That just means that there's some random interaction in the world.
Right, but I mean that means that it's not, the determinism is false then. If there's some random interaction, there's some spontaneity there.
Okay, we might be defining determinism differently. I would say determinism is the belief that all of your actions are determined by external factors, and I think most
Right.
people would agree that quantum randomness is an external factor, just like gravity is an external factor, right?
Yeah, but it's not thoroughly determined down the line like you're making it out to be in your initial statement.
Well, sorry, it would be. I mean, okay, one of the determinants is what like a random number generator comes up with, right? But I would say that that's still determined in some sense, not by you, and that's the relevant sense. I'm not debating that quantum randomness doesn't exist.
We
Okay.
can agree on that. But
Okay.
just like poking holes in this case a little bit for the audience, that you start seeing that there's holes in this, right? Of this story, right? Seems like at every turn, there's like a fitting a square peg into a round hole in order to deny the everyday experience. Is kind of my point with this, with my case, right?
Yeah. Okay. So then let me move on to talking about the everyday experience, which is,
Yeah.
I guess I would ask you, do you think that like atoms exist?
I mean, as a conceptual object, yeah, sure, they can exist.
But I mean, it seems like in almost nobody's everyday experience do they see atoms. In fact, my perception of the desk that I'm sitting at right now is that it's just like solid wood and that there's no atoms. It's not like there's small particles with lots of room between them, right?
Yeah, in your everyday life, the existence or non-existence of atoms is just for, intellectual contemplation, right? It's not really a salient thing to think about in your everyday life.
Yeah, well, I mean, it seems like the shared
Now,
experience of every human on Earth is that atoms don't exist, right?
now, sure, is it very useful to believe in the existence of atoms in order to do physical things, engineering, chemistry, et cetera, et cetera? Sure. And so I believe in that sense that it is true that there are atoms because it helps humanity progress forward and so forth. So yes, in that sense, I do believe that in the existence of atoms. But when you start using that existence of atoms to negate everything else, it starts getting a little bit suspicious that the atoms really work in the way that you're describing, and that our consciousness works in that way.
Okay, maybe again I'm misunderstanding what your pragmatist claim is, but from your clarification, I understand that basically the issue is if it's a shared common perception that basically everybody in society has, then that we should take it as truth. And I'm saying atoms not existing is a shared perception that almost everybody on Earth has, right? I mean,
Yeah, sure.
physically, yeah.
Yeah, right.
So it seems to me that it is then inconsistent for you to also believe that atoms exist.
Well, no. People, I mean, it's not about I have to be thinking that I believe in this. Absolutely. It's which belief you could say, which belief is most useful, right? And it's very clear that the innovations and great progress in physics is undoubtedly useful, and it helps us get through our day easier, right? So I'm not denying that, right?
Okay.
I'm just denying that consciousness works in the way that you're claiming it to, based upon that stuff, because it
Right.
denies a more useful belief that connects our experiences together. It makes more sense of reality than the alternative.
Okay. Yeah, exactly. I think
I
that the
get it.
issue,
Like
the
maybe like an example would be like if we're all in the Matrix, right? Then the Matrix is real.
okay.
And that belief is true.
All right. I think that that's kind of a bad standard for truth because there are lots of truths which are different than what everybody perceives. But I mean,
It's not about perception, it's about usefulness.
oh, it's okay. Well, I mean, if it's about usefulness, then I would say that determinism is more useful because it allows us to better understand what causes people to do certain actions. Whereas under your side of the proposition, you would just say, yeah, well, I mean, X killed Y, but do we really know why? No, I mean, there's choice involved.
So no. You see, this is where the Heideggerian point comes in, right? Is I'm not saying that you're completely free, right? I'm saying that there are causal factors that do influence the possibilities of your choices, and I'm even amenable to saying that there are certain states of the brain which can play a causal factor, right? I'm not denying that, right? With people with mental illness, et cetera, right? Not denying that. right? But what I am denying is that there isn't a sliver or a wedge or of possibility that you yourself choose, right? That's the difference. And
Right,
again,
but how, well, like if I decide to go right on a road versus left on a road,
yeah.
how exactly would you say that like the causal factors and free will interact? Is it like free will is choosing the weighting of the causal factors?
It can't. I mean, in a sense, yes, but it's also you yourself, your mind, yourself, right? The ego that is saying, "Oh, I'm going to go left this time. I think that that'll be better. I'd like to see the scenic route." Right, and that's
Yeah,
free
but
will right there.
if yeah, but I think that gets back to the point that I raised at the very beginning of the debate: is that if you chose the left because it's the scenic route, then the causal factor is truly that it's the scenic route, right? I think that anytime we justify our actions, it becomes pretty clear that we're looking for outside factors that are going to cause us to take a certain action.
Right, but it is your own self who is making the concept and making the judgment that that is the scenic way.
Um,
So there's
I
a
mean,
judgment there that you're making, right? Sure, there's a choice before that that leads to another choice, sure.
yeah, I mean, I think so. If you're saying that you chose this route because it's the scenic way, and then you chose that it's the scenic way, I would ask you how you chose that it's the scenic way,
Well, I
right?
mean,
And I think
that's
you get
just
like
what you
this.
chose. I mean, that's just what you prefer. It's just the judgment that you make.
Okay, I guess so. I mean, I think that it would be pretty clear that, for example, like I don't know, the artistic sensibilities that you grew up with, that your culture
Sure,
had, those things all have major causal roles. And
sure,
I think the problem is
absolutely.
that you get like this backwards domino effect where all of the choices are caused by prior choices, which are caused by prior choices, which eventually start at your birth.
Right, yeah, but you see that there is a possibility of you going, sure, I agree with you that your upbringing certainly throws you into a specific horizon of possibilities where you can make judgments about aesthetics, right? For sure. So like you go into the art gallery with all of these choices baggage, but you're free when you go to the art gallery, in my opinion, to be in a bad mood and say, I don't like that. Right? You're free to disparage a painting, and you're also free to choose another one to stop and look at, right? Because it catches you and because you want to look at it, but you're also free to just keep walking by, right? I don't know if you've been to art galleries before, but it's apparent that you can do this, right? Even in
Yeah, I've
paintings
been
that you
to
really
galleries.
like,
Yeah.
you don't have to stop and admire them.
Right. Yeah. Okay. I mean, I would agree that I don't think that there's a like social obligation that you stop and admire every painting, but I would say that it's caused by prior factors. So I guess the question here is really because you could see that there are causal factors to a large extent. Is the last sliver also causal, or is the last sliver free will?
Correct. That's where the meat of the debate is. Yes.
Okay. So in that case, it seems reasonable to believe that if we have all of that evidence of, so if we have, all of that causality, that we should just believe that the causality extends to 100%, because that's, again, I think that perhaps it'd be most useful for us to go back to the physicalist versus dualist point. I don't think that there's a reason to believe that, a mind exists.
Well, here's kind of the point. I didn't necessarily want to take the dualist position, but I guess I kind of am. But you're misunderstanding what when I'm saying causal factors. What I mean, it's not like hitting a cue ball and then hitting another ball and it going in the pocket, right? That's not what I mean by causal factors. Causal influence would be a better word, because I view these previous choices as a limiting effect, not as a sort of a directing effect, right? It's not directing an action, it's limiting possibility.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. Okay. I think that's a fair point. So I guess I would just say that it limits the options to one, right? Whereas you would say that there's a
Eventually,
range.
right.
Yeah.
Eventually, through your own, I mean, there comes a point when you yourself have to say, well, there's the fork in the road. I'm going to pick that one over that one, right? And
Yeah.
that's where the free choice comes in.
Okay. So, uh, I guess for the sake of argument, even if I grant that, a mind exists that's non-physical, it would seem to necessitate that the mind is uncaused, or at least does not depend on causal factors, right? Is that fair?
No, it's causally influenced by what you're thrown into.
Right. But sorry, it's not causally determined, right? You would say that the mind...
It's not causally thoroughly determined. It's not thoroughly determined all the way down.
Okay, so if that's the case, then like I would just ask like how you come from weighting one option to weighting another option. And I think that you similarly to my explanation of emergent phenomenon, you also don't have an explanation of like how exactly the mechanism of free will works, right?
Right, but at least I leave open, at least I capture all the phenomenal experience.
Well, okay.
And that seems better on balance.
Yeah, I guess where we disagree is I think we both capture the exact same experience, but whether or not it's illusory is the question here, right? But I think that if I say that you're seeing a mirage and you say, no, I definitely see that there's water over there, that's not evidence that the mirage is not true, right? Because sure. if my claim is true, then that equally explains the mirage.
Right, but again, we have in your view, you do not have the sense of the I, which I have, which is doing the work that you say I can't explain. Right?
I mean,
and in your sense, you have this unintelligible, unknowable process as the black box, and I have the I right in front of us.
Yeah, but I don't think it's unintelligible and unknowable. I think it's unknown at the moment, but it's possible that we could understand it, of course, again. But furthermore, it's possible to have an I, right? I mean, the I would be the property of emergent brain activity.
Right, but again, we're going down this road where mine is right here, and yours is punted off into the infinite future.
No, because again and again, I think that you have to misrepresent the case to
so how
act.
Is it explainable? Let's not get like into the nitty gritty, but how is it explainable at all?
But how is consciousness explainable?
Yeah, how is it explainable? How can you prove that it is a thing that will be explainable?
I can't prove it. I could posit that it could be explainable because, again, from the beginning of the debate, we know that emergent properties exist. We know that emergent properties can be quite complicated. We know that you have like millions and millions of neurons in your mind, which individually are pretty simple, but it's possible to posit that those individual neurons would cause an emergent property. Right?
And like, here's the problem, right? Is that you're forcing the audience to take a possibility as a necessity for your view.
So are you, right? The question is, which possibility is more likely?
I just say that we're not warranted to believe in determinism. That's all I'm saying. And I'm giving
okay. I think that you're allowed to have warranted belief in something if it massively outweighs every possible competing theory, right? Even if we don't know exactly how it works, I think it's reasonable. So, for example, it's reasonable for us to say that like gravity exists because that's coheres with what we know about the world. It's reasonable that that's a physical law. Now, I can't say exactly how gravity works, right? I could say that gravitons probably exist, they probably interact, but nobody knows like what actually is the cause of gravity. That's just a brute fact of the world. So I think similarly, like I might not be able to tell you exactly how consciousness works, but by the same token, that's an easier explanation for any phenomenon than the mind.
But your view is like not that though, because you can't even tell me why it's possible that consciousness can explain by your own words.
No, I said because it's an emergent.
Prove that it's there. It's just like, okay, we see other things that we call emergent properties. Why not mind? That's your view.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's not just that we call them emergent properties. It's that they are emergent properties in the sense that it's something that on a group scale is a property that is, on the individual scale is not true, right? It's not like you're adding up individual properties and then you get some emergent properties. That's the entire nature of emergence, right?
Right. Versus this this possibility to necessity idea of perhaps, right? Against this, you in sort of the competing view, you directly experience it.
Yeah, but again, I think that the problem with yours, which I think don't spend enough time on, is you're unable to explain how like the mechanism of free choice works, right? How you actually choose between two options. But also, I don't think that you could give any good evidence other than the fact that you experience it for the mind working, and you also can't make any headway on the mind physical interaction problem.
Well, I mean, if you're gonna push me, I'm actually more of an idealist. So I actually come to a more idealist stance on this, which is why I was hesitant on the atoms thing.
Okay, I mean, if you have an
So,
idealist view, then that seems to like contradict the pragmatist proposition, right? I mean, if you're saying that all of that, like when I sense the table, the chair, all of those things, that those aren't real, then I don't know how you can claim that because I sense
no, they're
consciousness,
real.
consciousness.
They're just they're real, but they're real in mind.
Okay, but you don't think that they're externally real, right?
Well, they're externally real in the sense that I have the perception of me and I have the perception of it over there, and so they're external in that sense. Yeah, they're external
Okay.
from what we call the body.
I mean, I think that you face a major problem here, which is that now, if you're saying that, I mean, yeah, I guess I sense them, but only because, like, I have the mental image of them, or I have some mental idea of them. I could say, yeah, I sense consciousness, but only because I have some mental idea of it, and at the same time preserve all of the external world.
Right, but you see, your view again is doing with these spooky, impenetrable systems and processes. Like that's the difference. Is I'm directly there, and I think that there's definitely a higher epistemic quality to mine, where we can actually deal with it and understand it and see it versus punting to possibility. Right, and
Right,
that's the major
but
point why I think that holding to determinism is wrong, is because we don't have, given the competition, we're both on shaky footing here, and I don't think you're warranted in believing in determinism, and so that's my position, right?
okay. Yeah. So again, to go back to this idealism issue, I think that the problem you face is, in short, that the idealist position, as I understand it, is that you may sense these tables, but they don't exist externally to your mind, right? They're part of your mind, even though you might feel
quote
that they
eminent
are
sci-
external to you.
It's mind generally, not me.
Okay, all right. And I think that, in short, what you're doing there is you're explaining everyday experience,
Right.
um, in not the most direct way. Is that fair?
I don't understand. Yeah, but okay.
You seem to be saying that my perception that, like, this table exists, whether or not I'd be alive, whether or not I was thinking about it, those types of things, that you seem to suggest that that's illusory, and that's in fact the exact
No, I'm not.
proposition.
When did I say it was illusory? Never said that.
Okay, so sorry.
I mean, you have to have some mind to perceive all your scientific data and experiments as well. Like you're not directly seeing an atom, you're seeing something on the screen. That's an illusion too, in a sense. You're not directly seeing it.
Okay, yeah,
Same thing.
perhaps I misunderstood your position. I mean, I would just say that, like, everything that I perceive exists, whether or not I would, be alive.
Oh,
It
sure,
exists
yeah, absolutely.
totally externally of me, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And is that not it is then, sorry, explain to me what you mean
I'm
by
not
the idealist position
I'm
then.
not Berkeley idealism. Like, yeah, everything still exists and has a permanence or whatever.
Okay, so then why were you worried about the proposition of an atom existing?
Well, I mean, it seems the reason I'm worried about it is it seems to be sliding towards a physicalism, which I'm uncomfortable with.
Okay,
But sure, I think it's a very useful belief. It's a very great belief that helps us get through the world, and I don't see any problem with it.
okay,
Sure.
it seems that you're agreeing that things can be objective states of the world, despite you not being able to sense it, or you not being able to know,
Sure.
right? Sure. Okay, so for example, atoms might be the case, right?
Sure.
So whether or not it's useful that atoms exist, it might be the case that atoms objectively do exist, right?
Sure.
Okay.
No, actually, no, it's not. It's actually not. Because
Wait,
if it's
sorry.
objectively true that it exists, then that's going to be a useful belief for sure.
I mean, okay, perhaps. I think that there are plenty of groups to which atoms existing is not a useful belief, right? So, for example, even if I told Cave cavemen that like atoms exist, that probably would not really be very helpful to them in their lifetime. But even so, I mean, it would still be objectively true, right?
Sure.
Okay,
But I mean, again, like if they had the entire context and the entire way in which that, I mean, you can't just say, okay, atoms exist with absolutely no context. That's not the way that we form beliefs and knowledge work, right? That's a not a good hypothetical, because you could do the same thing, going backwards, right, with some ancient technology, right? It's like you have to. It has to be. Everything is always embedded in a context. You can't just isolate things like that.
okay. I guess I don't think that really does anything to help your proposition, because again, the issue is that whether or not it's convenient to believe something, it's still possible that that thing is true. In fact, it is the case that that thing is true in the case of atoms, right?
But I can envision that there's still a way in which people understanding that things are a composition of smaller parts, which is really what the atom ultimately comes down to, right? Is like the small, that's useful, and I mean, something is made of these things doesn't seem to be necessary. I mean, even for everyday people today, even though they believe in atoms and it's useful for making their technological gadgets, which they're addicted to, right? That's still a useful belief given the way in which it is used and given the way in which we've built society around it, right? And it helps us to understand different physical interactions. And the caveman, if you taught him how that belief is useful and how that belief actually cashes out, for sure the caveman is going to agree that it connects experiences and is useful and so forth, right?
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, obviously, I think it would only be useful to the caveman, and so I don't think that it would really connect with the conscious experience of the caveman if we told him that there are, these subatomic particles, or even that atoms exist and they're not visible to the human eye, right? I don't think that would be immediately useful within his lifetime. So again, I guess what I'm going.
Ancients who thought about this too, right?
Right, but the reason that we weren't able
in this conceptual contemplation about the world as well in itself.
Right. So I agree that we had ancients that thought about this, but it wasn't useful in their lives. In fact, the reason that we didn't develop the atomic theory of matter until fairly lately in humanity's evolution, is because the fact that neither of these theories generated testable predictions that were able to falsify the other. Right. So it's not like the fact that atoms existed was actually able to give some type of specific prediction about the world that other theories weren't.
Right. I still think that I mean, sure, you can say this, but there are certain things that you come up with that are good to entertain, even though they aren't necessarily immediately useful. It just may not be the case that when you're walking around that you have that belief while you're walking around, but it's still useful to entertain those and to think about those. Now, on the testability point, right? And I think that there's like some type of a sort of bait and switch going on here, is where you allow for testing things and look in a mediated way, and there's the possibility of illusion there as well, right? Because you're not directly doing these tests. It's always mediated by some type of usually mediated by some type of instrument, and so the possibility of illusion there is still alive. I mean, we can run brain and vat problem if you want against you as well. And so I'm not sure about, going back to some of the earlier stuff about, the grand illusion of free will or whatever. I think it cuts both ways too on the testability.
Yeah, so I think that this is actually great, because it brings us back to the original problem, which is my view is not, I'm not the ultimate skeptic. I think that probably the best information that we have is the one that best coheres together in a way to explain the universe, right?
Right.
So, a good explanation of the universe is that we actually have observed atoms, and then we have evidence for quantum particles, and that those quantum particles create matter, and then matter interacts. Right. I think that that's a fairly good explanation of the universe. And as part of that best explanation that is possible for the universe, there is no mind. There is no mind-body interaction. Right. So I think the issue here is that I can believe something's an illusion if and only if it clearly falls outside of what our best understanding of the universe is, and that's clearly the case for mind-body, for a mind existing. Just like I think that the illusion of time slowing down when I'm stressed is an illusion because it does not conform to our best understanding of the universe, which is that human interaction has nothing to do with the speed of time.
Right, but I think that on balance, again, we just need to look at how much your view destroys, right? It's like, sure, you've created some type of black box system that could work. I'll grant you that there is a metaphysical possibility, right? But in order to embrace that metaphysical possibility, you basically have to negate everything about what it means to be a human, right? And so, I mean, you have all these, I mean, literature becomes meaningless and poetry becomes meaningless on your view to a certain extent, because there isn't, there isn't that thing there that they can give rise to emotions that are beyond simply the words on the text, right? Or the physical properties of them. And so I think the audience needs to, say if they want to embrace this view, which sort of is very reductionist, and it doesn't ultimately like deliver the goods, right? Or hold, open the possibility that that's false. Don't hold to that view. And whether you're an idealist or dualist or whatever, it seems like either of these two is a better, it doesn't cut out the sort of what it means to be, right? And so I think that the determinism here is sketchy on how it gets there, and then also cuts out a bunch of other stuff that I don't think that we'd be willing to do.
Sure. I don't think that there's. So I guess I disagree with you that determinism cuts out so much human experience, right? I think that even if we know on some level that things are determined, it doesn't mean that things aren't real in another sense, right? So, for example, it is perfectly coherent for me to think that a waterfall is really incredibly beautiful and almost a sublime experience, even if I know that waterfall is only the result of fluid dynamics in combination with the rigidity of rock in combination with gravity, right? So I think by the same token, I could say that there's a piece of poetry which I find incredibly touching and beautiful, even if I know that on that some level that poetry is only caused by the interaction of the neurons in the poet's brain. That doesn't make it any less important.
Yeah, but what, I don't understand why. Because, I mean, again, if it's completely thoroughly determined, I don't see how you get the liveliness of human experience there. Right? It's just like, oh, I'm doomed to like this poem. It seems quite sad.
I mean, I think obviously if you put it in that terminology, if you're doomed to like something that is sad, I think just saying that you're caused to like something does not make it sad. And I could show that because it seems to me that what you're saying is that as something gets more and more caused, as I have less and less choice, that's sad. But obviously it's not the case that it's sadder for me to like a poem because I have a huge amount of poetry experience and I know like I have my taste developed very specifically and I happen to like that exact poem. That's in no way sadder than if I've never read poetry before in my life and I pick up a poem and I guess in your world make the random choice that I like that poem. Your range of options has no effect on, how much you can enjoy a piece of music or poetry.
Right, but again, it seems like that your view is getting there through magic. Right.
Okay.
And this is again the promissory note of these emergent properties that I think is going to be like probably the biggest voting issue here, right? Is are you willing to I guess believe in something to which you're given the promise that at an undetermined date in the future will actually figure out if it's true or not, right? And I think that that's the big voting issue is when we posit again, whether dualism or idealism, unimportant, but when we posit a mind, right, we have emotions, we feel these emotions directly, and the poem is beautiful in part because, as you've done a good job of describing, there are these limiting causal forces or influences that make us, predisposed to like one thing or the other. But the way in which we're reading it now, choosing to read that poem, choosing to read it at a certain speed, etc., is what gives rise to sort of our experience. And I think that that's a much better, perhaps, explanation, although strong term, or way of looking at the world than it is to say, look, well, you can't see it, we don't know why, but these electrical impulses, that's all it is, right? What is love? Baby, don't hurt me. Well, it's the electrical impulses, right? And
Yeah.
it seems like that my view is more rich. It seems to be a better way of connecting and making sense of the world than your view, which is promissory at best.
Sure. So again, I think that when we're looking at propositions like these, our role here is, I can't, first of all, I'm not a neurologist, but even if I was, I couldn't give you a specific explanation. I can't give you the same type of rigor that we have for the standard theory on how exactly consciousness is created, right? But neither can you on your side, right? You can't give me the specific type of rigor about like how exactly do we know a mind exists? Describe to me all of the properties of a mind, right? Those types of things are incredibly difficult for both of us to do. Rather, I think that it is warranted to believe in determinism if determinism is far and away the most likely to believe. So it seems that we have three kind of options in this debate. The first one is physicalism. And it seems like if you believe in physicalism, then you're also necessitated to believe that determinism is true. The second belief that you raised is some type of dualist proposition. I think that dualism is almost incoherent for a few reasons. First of all, I think that the mind-matter interaction problem, which has gone unaddressed this entire debate, is a massive, massive problem, especially when we understand the interaction of matter with each other so well as we do now. Also, I guess in a dualist world, we would have to agree that everything else is matter except for this mind that somehow exists, which we have, no access to scientifically and can only access through a personal experience. And then last of all, so I think that that's the problem with the dualist world. Lastly, we have the idealist world. And I think that the major problem with this, as somebody pointed out in the chat, is that a major defense that you have of free will is that we have a clear perception of free will. But I could say the exact same about physicalism, right? A major defense of physicalism is that my first possible perception is, look, there's grass there, look, there's a tree, those things must be real. So I think that on that ground, you have to reject physicalism, and you also should reject dualism because I think it's not coherent. Lastly, we should talk about how you make a decision. I think that you also haven't addressed that at all, right? At least I could give an explanation for like how you would make a decision under my world, even if it's totally causally determined. You have no idea how like a decision would be made, right? We assume that it's not a random number generator, because if that's the case, then there's no free will enacted there. So I just don't understand what free will would actually look like.
Well, so sort of addressing it, you're forgetting option 4, which is that neither of these three is true and your view is still false, right? That's an important option for me to keep open, and the audience should again weigh only if that one belief, not that necessarily mine are true, but if there's been sufficient offense as well to negate your position as well. So now on the sort of the dualism point, again, I can explain it, but you'll just reject my explanation, right? I'm going to posit some type of animating soul or something like that, right? Like in a Greek sense, right? And you're just going to say, oh, well, you don't have proof for that. And then, I'm going to say, well, you don't have proof of consciousness from the electrical impulses. And you're going to say, well, that's okay. Mine's okay, but yours isn't, right? And so you're just not going to agree. You're just not going to accept my explanation in the same token that I don't accept yours, right? And so on the idealism point, right, is that I think dreams are here where we attack, right? In that you are aware that you have your perception, right? And this is like, that's why my view is better for illusion, because you have a more difficult time, it's just mere perception on my view, right? On your view, you have to go through this, you have a sub-black box that's the illusion creating deterministic box in addition to the normal box, right, to posit that things exist. And again, I'm not denying that the grass is really there out there, right? I'm not denying that. I just don't think that you have like access to that beyond your perceptual ability in virtue of the way that mind works, right? And so I'm not denying that there really is grass out there, and no one's going to deny that. My view doesn't deny that. It's just that I'm saying, well, you're perceiving grass, and everyone's going to be like, yeah, right? And so I think that you're going an extra entity here, right? Because I can have perceptions and I can call it real all I want, right?
Oh, okay. I suppose so. I'm a little confused. Like, I would agree that you don't have access to the grass beyond like your physical senses, but I think that that's kind of self-evidently true. I don't think that really gets. Sorry.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Okay, so okay, I don't think that that's really that important for the debate, because in this case, what we're talking about is, given that the external reality is true, is it true that a mind also exists independent of the external reality? So,
unless the mind is the external reality as well, which is the idealism. So one was the dualism point, which I addressed with the animating soul, and then the idealism is that it's very similar to your position, except that the external world is part of the mind via perception, and it really is existent, right?
Okay, but you wouldn't say it's existent independent of the mind.
Right, because mind is everything. Just like physics is everything for you.
Okay, I guess
open, like the difference is that I leave open the possibility of there being an I with the mind, right? And you don't.
Sorry.
Well, I leave open that possibility of my view being, without having black boxes, being right there, right? That's just a feature of mind. It's what mind is.
Okay.
Right? In yours, you have a bunch of other promissory notes attached.
Okay, I suppose so. I think that it's kind of unfair for you to say that mine requires promissory notes, whereas yours is just, look, everything exists and that's just the way it is, right? I mean, I think that it's also a pretty difficult proposition to explain how the mind would have all of these perceptions of the external world. But I also think it's fair to address that I keep coming back to this point, but I think the animating soul, not so much that I would reject. I mean, obviously I would reject it because of a lack of direct evidence, but even more so than that, I think that you're also faced with this massive problem of explaining how decisions are made, right? So if you say that it's the animating soul, I would ask you what causes one decision rather than another decision. And I don't know what you would say. Like, would you say that it's the nature?
That's the I. That's the ego, which is, mobilizing the animating soul. Right. Again, you're going to say there's no direct evidence of it, but again, you failed to give, you punt again on your side, and so you're not giving charity to my side, which is what I started with, right? There's no charity given to my side, but infinite charity on the promissory notes on the other.
I'm not. Sorry, to be clear, I'm not specifically right now addressing the issue of whether or not this exists. I'm saying even were it to exist, I don't understand how you come to a decision, right? If I choose to go left instead of go right, how is that decision reached?
By you decide it. It's an action. It's an action that you do.
Right, but like,
there's no further explanation needed.
Okay, that seems awfully like a black box to me. That's the problem, right?
Well, no, you have an inner life of the mind where you agonize over the choice, right? And then you end up doing the action. You mobilize yourself to do the action. And that's all that choice is. It's not as complicated as yours.
Right, but it seems like you're
hang up here. Sometimes you don't, there isn't something in between. Sometimes there's unmediated experiences.
Right, so you're unable to explain. I guess, I mean, the entire point of your argument would be that it's inexplicable why somebody chooses one thing rather than another, right?
At rock bottom, when you get to the fork in the road, after all the other causal forces has limited your possibilities, that's the authentic self. You can go with society or whatever, but the authentic self is the one who's really at bottom, grabbing that possible future and making it present.
Right, but you can't appeal to the nature of the authentic self, right? Because if it's, the nature of the authentic self, then that seems like that's causally determined. Rather, you'd have to say that there's some inexplicable non-random event which occurs at the end of decision making, which causes one decision to be made rather than another.
Wait, could you say that again? I got distracted. Sorry.
Oh, no problem. So what I'm saying is that you appeal to the self. Now, I don't think it can be the
Right.
nature of the self, right? It can't be like, I like blue, because that's
Yeah,
a
sure.
causally determined factor. It has to be a non-random, non-causally determined event at the very end of the decision-making process, which causes one decision to be chosen instead of another.
Look, see, again, you're trying to play these games to deny yourself the responsibility of your own freedom, right? You have to realize that you pick the blue ball over the red ball or whatever, example doesn't matter, right? And that's your choice. That's what the eye does. The nature of the eye is not to have it, as you're correctly saying, stamped in blue is good, red is bad, right? It's not like that, but it's the nature of the self is that it is that which makes choices. Like, that's part of the nature of it, right? And that you yourself have to mobilize yourself to make that choice.
Okay, I suppose so. I just think that the issue here is, again,
Pausing in a way.
so if we believe in determinism, there's so many things. Sorry, if we don't believe in determinism, there's so many things which are totally foreign to us that we have to take for granted for the sake of argument, right?
Okay.
So, for example, we have to accept that there are events which are non-random and non-determined, and there's no other event in the world which is like that, right?
Like what?
Which are non-random and non-determined.
Non-random and non-determined. Yeah, sure.
But nothing exists like that, right? We have to posit that exists as almost a whole new category of entity.
I think that we do this every day when we decide what we eat for lunch.
Right. But again, in terms of what we know of the world,
we have direct evidence of it, and you have mediated evidence, and you also have black box when this is the nature of who you are. This is what it means to be human.
Right. Okay. The issue here is from what we understand, we understand a fair amount about the world, and no physicist has ever discovered an entity which is both non-random, as in there's not just random fluctuations like in quantum particles, but also that is non-caused, right? You agree that that's totally foreign, right?
In the world of physics, yes, but the world of physics, in my view, kind of has its blinders on a bit, and it, for better or worse, right? Probably for better, that it is a limited scope. You don't call a physicist to interpret a poem.
Yeah. Okay. I agree with you. I don't know how that applies. I mean, we are talking about the causal interactions, or the lack thereof. So it seems like a physicist would be able to shed some light here.
The physicist already comes with it the assumption, your assumption. It already starts with this assumption of physicalism, right? And it excludes the possibility of there being a mind. And so, of course, it's not going to find anything.
Well, no, I don't.
The way that you find mind is through internal contemplation, and by looking at the world. It's not through physics. It's not through testing. It's right there in front of you.
Okay. I guess so. I think that again, we keep running into this problem of like the issue here is that a presupposition of physics is not that mind doesn't exist, right? A presupposition of physics is that we should be able to explain the natural world using the scientific method. And we're unable to discover the mind with the scientific method, right? Is that fair?
Yeah, absolutely. You cannot discover the mind when you come in with the scientific worldview. Absolutely, 100%.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry. I think that you're confusing two things. You're confusing the scientific worldview and the scientific method, right? So
Sure,
of course there's
testing with your extensive testing, ruling out possibilities, confirming results. Absolutely, you cannot run a test with a machine or anything like that to do it. You can't repeat it. No.
Right. Okay. So I agree with you. But again, the issue here is I just think that I don't find our first person experiences that credible, because there are illusions, as I addressed earlier, that almost everybody shares, but that seem, frankly, incoherent if we believe them to be true, right?
Sure.
Like, yeah. So, I mean, we have to have some basis for believing that those things are false, right?
Right. But here's the deal, right? Is that you're using first person experiences to do your scientific method.
Yeah, okay, I suppose so.
You're always filtering whatever you look at through your, you would say, your senses and your brain. You're always filtering things in results. And so it cuts both ways. When you start saying can't trust first personal experiences, then you can't do science without an I. You have to have a person to do science. Science doesn't happen in the void.
So I think I tried to address this earlier in the debate when I said that I'm not the ultimate skeptic, right? I do believe that some first-person experiences can be believed, but I believe that they can only be believed insofar as they're able to cohere to a reasonable worldview, which explains the nature of the universe, right?
Sure. So the question then is like, how are you determining that in the side that helps you that those are credible, but in the everyday side, which you're more in my side every day, that those are not credible?
So I think that obviously we have to believe that the dualist framework is just untenable here, right? Are you just talking about idealism versus physicalism?
No. I'm just saying that you're discounting first personal experiences when it negates determinism, whatever the other view is, right? But on the side where you have free choices, which you have more first personal experiences of that than doing science, you're negating that, and you're saying that those first person experiences are uncredible, but the ones that help your case are credible. And I'm wondering why.
Sure. So again, because I think that the ones that help my case result in a more coherent worldview than the ones that help your case. And here's why. So the issue here is that we've done a large amount of studying of physics, right? We understand things like quantum models, the standard model, those types of things, right? Those cohere to explain a huge amount of like black hole interaction. Those explain the common laws that we see when we like drop a brick and it falls to the ground. So those things, sorry?
I'm not denying any of that.
Right. So those things do a good job of explaining the world. And then I think part of explaining that world is that those things do not prescribe a mind, nor do they even allow a mind to exist, right? There's no way that a mind could interact with those things. So therefore, we ought reject a mind. Now, I guess what you're saying is that if I take the opposite view, which is that, our mind experience is very important, but like these other experiences are important too, I think that results in unnecessary complication of the world, right? We should try to do our best to explain it as simply as possible. And the simpler explanation is that your mind does not actually exist independent of physical reality.
Well, I mean, like, again, sure, I grant that you have explanatory value, and I can sure generate laws of moving bodies in either of the two frameworks that I've done. Like, I'm compatible with explaining celestial bodies. But notice, and this is for the audience, that what the determinist view, what it leaves out and negates is the very thing that you're closest to. And so, sure, okay, I can do the same, but I'm also not completely denying the everyday experience that you have, right? And so that's the major difference there. And the reason that I don't like determinism is because, sure, it's helpful when you're viewing things that are non-conscious, but when you're looking at conscious beings, you have to give up a lot about what we not only just intuitively know, we can talk about like psychology as well. There's many different, you would say that this is like inside of the realm of the emergent property, right? Mm-hmm. Determinism seems to me at least to cut all of that out. And so it's not a view that seems like one that you can hold, and thus I say that determinism is false, right? Again, to win, I don't need to be committed to any particular view, just that view is wrong, right?
Sure. Okay. So two things. First of all, I think that so the problem with your stance that is not present with my stance is that if you agree that there are laws for celestial bodies and you agree that there's laws on the quantum level, my theory could stop there. I could say, okay, that's all we know. Now, I don't know exactly how those things combine to create a consciousness, but that's an unsolved problem. I agree. That's a massive problem from my side. On your side, to solve that problem, you have to posit something new, which in and of itself creates new problems like the interaction problem, right? So I think that the issue here is not so much that I'm just rejecting experience because I don't like it. It's that I'm doing the absolute minimum to explain our world, whereas you inevitably have to layer things on top. Also, if I could quickly address you said I would like to quickly address the kind of neutral point of view that you raised, where you said, well, I mean, I don't know if I don't have to prove that that dualism or idealism is true. That it's just possible that there's some other option which exists. I'm not so sure that there's like some other option that exists coherently within this debate, because I think the problem is that you seem to be depending on the notion that the mind is non-physical. So in the case where the mind is non-physical, either the rest of reality is also non-physical or it is physical. So if it is physical and the mind is non-physical, then that's dualism. And if it isn't physical and the mind isn't physical, then that's idealism. I don't know what the other fourth option would be.
Well, like under the idealist view, right, which is why I'm more persuaded towards that, is that like when we talk about rules of physics, I say, oh, those are the rules of mind. My view stops there.
Right. Okay. So.
And again, like notice that where your view stops, it starts again and doesn't get there, right? Which is the major point of this debate, I think. Right.
So sorry. Under the idealist framework, you would still agree that it's possible to have, I don't know, like all of the laws of gravity and the laws of quantum physics, all of those types of things.
Yeah, they'd be laws of mind instead.
Okay, but then you also have to posit this extra law of mind, which is not only do all of these laws exist, but also like, this uncaused, non-random entity exists called free will.
Yeah, but you do the same thing. It don't necessarily have to assert anything about the existence of the rule. It's just based upon observation of mind that we get these, coherent and that there seems to be some type of rule around it in the same way that you look at the physical stuff. And then you say, okay, there's some type of rule about it, right? There's scientific realism, anti-realism, blah blah blah. I think I can capture it, right? It's the same process that you do.
Yeah.
So not only does there have to be this physical stuff, but there has to be this law about the physical stuff.
Okay. I guess so. I guess the issue that I'm trying to raise is I feel like your position inevitably holds more kind of axiomatic foundations than mine does, because even in the idealist framework where you would say that there are all of these laws of matter, you would have to posit an additional law that the mind exists. Whereas under my framework, yeah, maybe it's a black box. Yeah, maybe I don't understand, but at least I say, I think it probably emerges from the physical properties that we already know. And in that way, I mean, I think that that's the most reasonable proposition when we already have a bunch of problems that we know. So for example, one great example of this would be if we have like a floating object, right? And it just floats above the earth. I think it would be reasonable that your first reaction is, okay, there's probably some way in which this emerges from our standard model that I don't quite understand. Maybe there's some like electromagnetic interaction or something. I don't know what's happening here, but that's reasonable. I think it would be less reasonable to say, okay, I'm going to posit this new law, and this new law is that actually this object, just it has some special property where it just floats. And that's the new law, is that if you see an object with this configuration, it just floats, right?
Sure. But again, like you say that I have to posit this new thing, right? Which is like the appeal of idealism is, and it's like, what direct evidence of there being physical stuff do you have that is not filtered through your perception? You don't have any.
No.
Right, and we're on the same turf here, right? Because I say mind, you say physical, and we're on the same turf here. We're on the same level. You gotta start somewhere.
Right. Okay. Sure. But whereas my claim is that when we do our best to understand the world using our senses, we come up with a certain set of laws, and that those set of laws are universally true. Your claim is that we come up with a certain set of laws, but then there's also this mind, right? That's the difference here, is that while we both depend on sensory interaction, my sensory interaction results in the most simple conclusion, whereas your sensory interaction results in the most simple conclusion and then adding on other parts to explain consciousness.
But again, this is like the whole charity point. Is like, I'm sure that you perfectly are allowed for new ways to look at the material world to emerge, but you're not willing to give the charity to my new rule, the mine, right?
But I think there are charities in different senses. Whereas mine is, there's an unsolved problem in physics. Yours is that there's like a new entity which exists, right? I think that I'm not required to give the same amount of charity to positing new unexplained entities as I am just saying, well, I don't know exactly how this is.
It's not necessarily an entity.
So do you think that the mind is not an
idealism.
entity?
Idealism does not have to have it as an entity.
Oh, what do you mean?
It permeates everything is mind, right? Everything, it permeates everything. It's not an entity.
Okay, all right. I guess, however you want to conceptually refer to it, you have to say that there exists something which I guess permeates everything, which
your
is
atoms, which is your material substance.
right. But the problem is that under your side, you still accept those, but you add something new. Whereas under my side, I just accept those, and that's the end, right?
Right. But the new thing that I'm adding is the thing that is the one thing we can directly experience, right?
Well,
And you're adding all of this other stuff and all this other stuff, right? That you can't explain.
Okay, I disagree because I don't think that it's the only thing that we can directly experience. I think that I can, experience the mind about it as directly as I can experience the outside world. But whereas, just thinking that the mind exists doesn't do a great job of explaining the external world, because when we'd have to explain how like all of physics works, just thinking that the external world exists might be able to explain the mind, right?
But again, look, with my mind stuff, I'm happy because unlike you, the problem of illusion starts to kick harder. Because now you're saying, look, the external world exists, but I have all of these unreliable first-person experiences. I'm like, I don't know, probably not, right?
Okay, I think we have to go back to the question of the flying object, which I brought up earlier.
Yeah, could you re-explain that to me? Yeah,
sure. So if you saw an object that, as far as you understood, was inexplicably floating above the surface of the Earth,
right.
Would your reaction be that object is, some new type of object which we've never seen before, and we have to amend our physical theories to understand it? Or would you say that probably it's emergent from the physical theories and we just don't understand exactly how that works?
Well, I think we should hold open the possibility of both and not close the door.
Right, but okay, would it be reasonable to believe?
Information about it. I mean, like this is like an absurd hypothetical that I don't understand the point.
Okay, well, the point is to say that I think that our first reasonable reaction should be not to throw out the theories that we know so well,
Sure.
Or to change them drastically,
Yes,
but rather to try to understand how they create a certain phenomena. So, for example, when a physicist sees a hitherto unexplained phenomena, their reaction ought not to be to throw out the rest of physics. Right. Their reaction ought to be, let's see how we can explain this given physics. And if it's proven that it's really impossible to explain given physics, then we change frameworks.
But this is my pragmatism, like captures this perfectly, because it says, look, all of our rules of mind, rules of whatever, right? All of these are extremely useful. They've been useful for many years. Right? If we're to add something new, like you're saying, then it completely disrupts all of that. So better to pick the path of minimal disruption and run with that and see where we go than to completely rewrite everything. Yeah, my pragmatism is perfectly amenable to this. I don't see a problem.
Okay, I disagree with you because I think that I'm not adding anything new, right? I mean, the worst you could accuse me of, which you have multiple times through the debate fairly, is that I don't understand how consciousness works. I don't understand how the properties actually emerge. But that's just a way of me saying this arises from physical phenomena, but I don't know how. Whereas on your side, you have to say, no, I don't just not know how this works, but actually posit something new, which we also don't know how that works, right?
No, it doesn't, because you're having to you have this process in there, right, that I don't have. Right, I don't have any in the idealism view, right? In the mind view, you're a little bit more. You're probably correct, because then I have two different sets of things. Yeah, I grant you. But in the idealism view, right, you're having to create this entirely new process. When for me, that's sort of just this sort of at the essence level.
Okay, so I guess perhaps to put this most charitably, you would say that under the idealist view that the laws of physics are an illusion in the same way that I say under the physicalist view that the mind is an illusion.
No, because I can have concepts being real or not. I could go either way on that.
Okay, I mean, if the laws of physics are also real, then you're unnecessarily complicating things. Right. But if you're saying that they're also an illusion, right? So that physics is Yeah.
So you're committed to the fact then that scientific laws are not real; they don't exist. Otherwise, you're doing the same thing.
No, because I have the physicalist interpretation, right?
Right. So they don't exist, right?
No, under physicalism they do exist.
Yeah, but then you're doing the same thing as me.
I'm sorry, I don't know how.
Look, we have idealism law 1, right? Which is whatever, right? And I say that exists, sure, or it doesn't exist. I'm not committed. Let's say it exists, right? And then on your physicalism side, you're saying, okay, I have the physical stuff, and then I have physics law 1 that exists.
Right. Okay. Yeah. I think.
Entities.
Yeah. Okay. I think that's fair. That on that level, like it's even, right? You would have idealism, and then suppose that the physical laws are emergent from that, and I would suppose the physical laws and say that mind is emergent from that. Would you say that that's a fair summary?
Could you repeat that? Sorry, I'm distracted. Sorry.
No problem. So it seems like you're positing idealism, and then say that the physical laws are emergent from that. But I'm positing physical laws and saying that the mind is emergent from that. Is that fair?
Yeah, we could say that.
Okay. So I guess that we have to talk about what we think is more likely, that the mind produces these incredibly complicated physical laws, which we can't even understand, or that a huge number of neurons interacting causes a mind, right? I think that's rather difficult, but I do think that the odds are more in my favor.
Well, I mean, I think, again, I'm going to go a little bit Kantian here. The crowd is already groaning. But in the sense that when you're doing all of your scientific method stuff, you're filtering it through I call it mind, right? You're filtering it through something with these conceptualizations there, right? You can't avoid turning raw input into a humanly interpretable way. And so I don't see the on both sides there's a tension here that both of us are doing that.
So maybe you can explain that one more time.
Like when you see the ball drop, right? Even the very concept of dropping or whatever physical rule you want, it is a conceptualization that comes from you would say brain, I say mind, right? And so there's still that filtering of conceptualization that's going on there. You're conforming your sensory input into a concept, right?
I guess I would say that it's what we're doing is when we're creating laws is we're trying to describe reality, but I would say that the ball, actually drops independently of us, right? Those things actually happen. Sorry?
I can say more or less the same thing in the idealism or dualism case, more so in the dualism.
How would you
a little bit shakier?
How would you say that in the idealism case?
Well, like in the idealism case, like it gets harder because everything is mind, right?
Yeah.
So it's harder to make these types of distinctions, right? And so I might just bite the bullet and be like Schopenhauer and say, yeah, everything is will, everything is will, right? And so and be kind of Buddhist about it and say, well, all these distinctions between us are really an illusion, right? We're really all one on some level, right?
Sure.
So it's a little bit shakier on the idealism case, but
Okay. All right. I guess I think that the dualism case I think already has a lot of problems that you kind of conceded when you said that under the dualism things would be unnecessarily complicated, right?
Yeah, I do multiply an entity on the dualism case. That is correct.
Okay. So then in the case where we're talking about idealism, it seems like you have to resort to this type of thing to explain like the physical laws, right? So for example, it seems to me rather confusing to say that a mind produces everything, and a mind also like produces all of these things that are unable to be sensed directly by us, but are incredibly complicated, like quantum physics and and electromagnetic forces. All of those things, right?
Right, but oh man, we've been doing this for a while. My brain's hurting. But I mean, could you say it again? Sorry, my brain is foggy.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely no problem. So
the dualism multiplies entities, and then in the idealism,
and then so in idealism, basically we're arguing: is it more likely that physical laws produce mind, or that mind produces physical laws?
Right.
And I think
Right. Okay, I got it. So, right, but you see, here's the rub, though, is that you're also saying that the physical laws exist, and how they are physical is quite strange. You can't observe them. You can't test the law's existence itself. You could have evidence, and you can test for the law and other stuff, right? But you can't perform a test on the law itself, right?
I don't know why that. I don't know how that
Can't-
helps your case at all, though.
Well, I'm trying to poke a hole in this. How are they existent?
Well, I would say that physical laws are existent independent of us, and then we try, based on observation, to map math onto that, right? So you can
Right,
predict
but
things.
it's us who first initially conceptualized the world in that way. How are they are they existing in Plato's heaven somewhere?
No, I mean, I would say that even if all humans were dead, like planets would still act according to gravity, right?
Okay, does everything have a location? Does every
Uh,
physical entity have a location?
Yeah, I suppose so. Yeah.
Where are the physical laws located?
They aren't a physical entity.
Oh, well, then you're multiplying a type.
Wait, no, I'm not. I'm saying, okay,
So
maybe
you have
I should.
physical stuff and then the non-physical laws.
Oh, okay, maybe, yeah, okay, sorry. Maybe I haven't been clear here. The physical laws are a description of physical events, right? So humans come up with those laws. I don't think that those laws exist objectively, right? But I think that the interactions that they describe exist independent of humans. Is that fair?
Sure. Yeah,
Okay.
I get your view. Yeah, sure.
So
Yeah, all of the tree that falls in the forest actually falls. Okay.
right, exactly. That's what I'm saying. So again, the question that we're faced with now is, do you think it's more likely that a mind would produce these incredibly complex physical interactions, or that incredibly complex physical interactions would produce a mind, right?
Yeah, I mean this is where I think we've basically said everything we can say, and I think that you've summed up like the battlefield of the debate very well, I think.
Okay, I think we've kind of hit rock bottom. So I don't know if you want to do closing statements. I'd be happy to do that.
You want to do it? Go ahead. You can do yours first, or I can do mine first. Up to you.
I don't really care, but I'm happy to do mine. I'm happy to do mine first, since I did my opening statement second.
Yeah.
So I guess to summarize the debate, basically, I think that there exists three circumstances. There's a physical circumstance. I think that Cooldog has basically conceded that this would result in determinism, right? I think we, because that's kind of unexplored conceptual territory, and that seems to be conceded. I think that we should accept it for the purposes of this debate, that if physicalism is true, determinism is true. The second possible world is the dualist world. Now, I think that there are multiple problems with this. Cooldog agreed. Basically, the major problem with dualism is, first of all, that it is multiplying an entity, as Cooldog would put it. That is, you are taking physical laws which already exist and you're adding onto them a mind. But also that, as I keep addressing through this debate, there is this interaction problem which is just unexplainable, right? There's no way to explain how the mind would make the body do a certain action, because we understand the interaction between particles really quite well, and nowhere in there is this and the free will exists part, right? So, and then lastly, there's the idealist proposition. And I think that this is perhaps on the most even footing with the physicalist proposition. The idealist proposition being that actually all physical interactions are the product of a mind. I think that this is less realistic than the inverse, because whereas it is very reasonable to assume that given physical properties, in some universe, you might create life, and it might be useful for that life to have a self-conception, because that would mean that it's more likely to be able to, for example, carry out acts of, self-preservation, right? Those types of things. It is reasonable to believe that given physical laws, there would be some parts of the world or some parts of a universe where there are entities that create consciousness and that have a qualia or a personal experience. I think that the inverse is not true, right? I don't see why given a mind, you would have the type of physical laws that you do today, or the type of physical interactions, right? There's simply no need for a mind to be able to have quantum randomness, right? That's not something that affects us on the day-to-day scale, so I don't see why a mind would produce that. And then basically, I think that that's the issue, at issue in this debate is how realistic the determinist interpretation is compared to the other ones. Again, I'm not able to perfectly give you an explanation of determinism, but I think that determinism is far and away the most likely explanation, and for that reason, you're warranted to believe in it, right? I think that there are three possible issues: either the mind is physical or non-physical, or the external world is physical or non-physical. And if when we address all of those, the only relatively likely case is the physicalist case, and under the physicalist case, determinism is true. Therefore, determinism is far and away most likely to be true.
All right. So let's I think it was a great debate, good clash. I really did enjoy it, and thanks to the peanut gallery for sticking in here. So I think the best way to describe my opponent's position and to finally put the determinism, or at least persuade you not to hold the determinist view, is that, let's say you go to a bakery and you see all the breads he has, and then the clerk there says, "Look, man, you're a great customer. I have this shipment of bread that is the best ever. It will sell. It is the best, right?" And he said, "But it'll come tomorrow." And so you say, "Okay, I'll wait and buy bread tomorrow." So you come back the next day. It says, "Oh, wait, no, wait, it's there. We just have to figure out how to make it. Don't worry about it. It'll be here later." And so you come back the next day, and then the same story goes. Now the question that the audience has to decide is, do you want the bread right in front of you that you can see, touch, and feel? Well, not in this case, that you have direct perception of, that is the inner life of the mind that is right there in front of you? Or do you want to take this promissory note that will not sort of deliver the goods? So I think that that's the main thing that you should be voting on, is that specific idea of that. My view has, we both will ultimately claim to reach the same result. However, mine is one that you can actually observe in an unmediated way, right? To even talk of it as observing, you only do it post facto. It's immediate. There's immediacy there that you just have instantly in almost every action you take. You can feel yourself making the choice to do one thing over the other. And so you can have that story, or you can have a story that isn't there. Of course, I don't need to prove one specifically or the other, just to give you some food for thought, pardon the pun, of to think about ways in which we could conceive of the world in a way that better fleshes with our everyday life and the way that we actually live as humans, as opposed to a view which interestingly negates this first-person experience, but accepts other ones in order to farther itself for seemingly arbitrary or unknown reasons, in my opinion, right? And so the dualist point, again, is a point where we see the lack of charity on display, where we're allowed to posit that this black box of process exists, which has who knows how many steps in it, versus one singular other entity that will solve our problems in flesh and cohere with our everyday experience. And then on the idealism side, we see that we're on essentially even footing, but leaving open the possibility for oneself to actually take responsibility for their life and grapple with their own future and take one of those possibilities, which has been delimited by causal forces, in hand, right? And on the idealism point, we see that it's not just that that everything is in a mind, but that everything is mind, in the same way that everything isn't in a physical object, it is a physical object. And so we're on equal footing, except my view and the idealist side leaves open the possibility for your everyday experience to not be negated. And so I would urge the audience to vote against determinism, for the holes that have been poked, and for the fact that it better coheres, and it's a better way of looking at the world as you sit in your chair listening to this. So with that, I close. Again, thank you, everybody. An excellent debate. I really enjoyed it, Bruhmachine. Really enjoyed it.
Yeah, thank you. That was lots of fun.
Okay, awesome. Thanks, both of you. Appreciate it. So I'll post the voting poll in debate chat. From what I can see, everyone is eligible to vote except for Ellie and I Hate CS. So if everyone else could vote, really appreciate it. And I know we have one question from Philosophical Zombie Hunter that we can pose in the meantime, but if anyone else has any questions, feel free to drop it in debate chat.
Yeah, so I think I see the question that says, can we consciously choose our own values and motivations? As these things don't have biological advantages. I would say that no, you cannot consciously choose them, right? I don't think that there's anything that you can consciously choose, but because those things don't have a biological advantage, it doesn't mean that we have a strong predisposition naturally to one or the other. It just means that what causes us to choose them is probably more likely environmental factors.
Yeah, my response is actually pretty similar. And it's going to say that you may not be able to flip a switch and change what you value, but you can make choices which will open up the possibility of valuing things in a different way. Of course, in a minimal sense, of course, like if you can choose to value drinking the warm beer over the cold beer if you so choose by making that choice. On such a minimal level, but on bigger issues, it's going to be something more like Aristotle, where you have to choose a direction and aim towards a possibility in your future and sort of work towards that by making smaller choices along the way to open up that possibility horizon, we could say.
Okay, nice one. And I don't see anybody typing in debate chat, so I think we're good on questions. And I guess if anybody has any last second ones, they could just ask it in Serious Saloon. So I'm all set if you guys are.
Uruguay has a question.
Oh yeah, go for it, Uguay. Or you can unmute yourself. Yeah, you can stop the recording. You're all set if that was your question.